A woman went for a jog one night in Central Park, unaware that this jog would change her life and many others forever. This is the Patricia Meili story. Hi, Amy.
Hi. The reason I didn't realize I know this case is because the woman's name has changed since she was involved in this story, correct?
I don't know what you mean. But
Okay.
I'm not going to answer it because we'll hold off on that.
And I just got the chills because I also have another reason why I think I know the case, because you and I talked about a certain movie recently that gives me the chills just thinking about that movie.
And I have a feeling you know the case, but...
Oh, my God. I can't believe I never thought to cover this case. Sorry.
Exactly. Before we get there, though, I just want to point out the obvious as well, that we are 2 days away from Halloween. And I'm pointing that out because you always ask about Hannah's costumes.
Oh, yes. Tell me.
Yeah.
Do tell.
Yeah. So she had a cute little cow costume. But unfortunately, her head's a little big now for it. My daughter has an above average head size. So we pivoted and picked one of her favorites, and now she's going to be Bluey, and her outfit's really cute. We're going trick or treating, so I'm pretty excited about it.
I can't wait. Maybe she could wear the costume when she comes to visit the next day.
She could definitely wear it.
Actually, they might have Halloween events. Yeah, bring it with you for sure.
Yeah, I'll bring the costume. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that because I was excited. I was just downstairs. Looking at her costume going, oh, I'm pretty excited for this.
Yeah, it's so cute.
James and I also got costumes, but I'm not even going to tell you about them. They're ridiculous.
Is it part of a theme, the three of you?
It's not a theme because we really couldn't. I couldn't be in like the jumper, like James and I in jumpers for the parents. Just didn't feel quite right.
Okay.
So we're kind of funnies on our own. So
we're
all doing our own thing. All right. Yeah. We'll send you pictures. You're going to appreciate it, I think. Okay. So back to the case I selected for today. I am teaching Introduction to Criminal Justice this year for the first time in 16 years, as I think I've pointed out on another episode. The first time I ever taught this class was at John Jay, but we didn't offer it at our school until this semester. We always taught criminology, but not criminal justice. And to highlight some of the units like policing, prosecution, the courts, and so on, I'm showing the Netflix series When They See Us, following each unit. And I almost forgot how incredible this series is. However, I'm not going to say anything more, and neither are you, because it might give away the plot for some people who have not. But I will say, as incredible as the series is and the injustice that it highlighted, I realized what was missing from it was the focus on the woman who was victimized.
Such a strong point.
Yes. So we're remedying that today. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce everyone to the Central Park jogger, Patricia Ellen Meili. Known as Tricia Meili, she was born in northern New Jersey in 1960. The youngest of 3 children, her family moved to Upper St. Clair, a Pittsburgh suburb, when Tricia was a child, and that's where she attended high school. Tricia was quite a successful academic. In fact, I read she was successful in all of her endeavors, one of those people, you know. She was a Phi Beta Kappa, which I was like, oh, she was in a sorority, but this is the National Honor Society. Right?
That's great.
I know. So she was a National Honor Society economics major at Wellesley College for her undergraduate degree. She then went on to earn a double graduate degree, an MBA and MA at Yale. Following graduation, Tricia began working as an associate at the Wall Street investment bank Salomon Brothers. Do you remember them?
Nope.
It was a powerhouse firm from the 80s.
What happened
and the
to
90s. You know, I think they just, I don't know. I think they were bought out by another company.
Okay.
But I just don't follow Wall Street. It's just not, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure they were just subsumed by another company.
Because, of course, I'm thinking, why did they steal money and they went down? Or, you know, like, I want to hear the good story. No.
Unfortunately, that's where our mind goes.
Okay.
Tricia lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is a neighborhood you and I both lived in at one point in Manhattan.
Yeah.
So brings back good memories, right?
Mm-hmm. And also, do you remember, this also reminds me, we covered another case. The victim lived on the Upper East Side and she was victimized or murdered in Central Park as well.
That would be Jennifer Levin. Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
and it was also during the 80s.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I believe her case influenced the response to this case, if I'm not mistaken. We could talk about that at the end.
That might be. I hadn't considered that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about. Lots to talk about at the end today. Could be a long one. Sorry. So in 1989, Trisha's life was going really well. That is until she went for a jog in Central Park on the evening of April 19th. Now, Trisha had gotten home from a long day's work around 8 p.m. Like she did most evenings, to decompress, she left her apartment to go for a run. You probably can relate to this because you're a runner, right? Does it help you, does running help you kind of decompress and get out all the, energy of the day?
Yes, except I would never be able to work a full day and then go running. I would have to run in the morning to, start things on the right foot.
Now, Trisha loved running in the park, and she said that being in nature gave her a feeling of vitality running through the park. Central Park is iconic in New York. It's beautiful.
I used to run there all the time. Oh,
right.
It was my favorite.
If you're a New Yorker and you live near Central Park, you spend a lot of time there because you do feel like you're transported somewhere else. It's a wonderful feeling, and still you're surrounded by the city. Trisha typically ran about 6 to 7 miles 4 or 5 days a week, so she was an enthusiast and a serious runner. And she usually ran the same route most of the time, which included going from her apartment door to the 84th Street entrance of Central Park by the Met. So that's the east side of the park, I think 5th Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and then she'd run to the 102nd Street cross drive to the west side and back.
I know that route.
Yes, I bet you do. On this evening, though, Trisha never made it out of the park. Shortly before midnight, her lifeless body was found in a ravine just 50 feet from the 102nd Street cross that she usually took. She was found by 2 men who'd been walking themselves through the park, and she had clearly been the victim of a savage attack. Trisha was barely alive. The men called 911 immediately. Patricia Meili was rushed to the hospital where her injuries revealed that she'd been brutally beaten and sexually assaulted. Amy, she had been hit in the face so hard that her eye had burst. It crushed the socket. She had massive skull fractures, deep facial lacerations. Her brain was swollen, and her doctors found that she'd suffered a traumatic brain injury from repeated blows to the head. I mean, also, she had lost around 75 to 85% of the blood in her body.
I would imagine that had she not been discovered, she would not have made it.
Yes, because she also was suffering from hypothermia.
Oh.
So, yes, had these walkers, these 2 men walking through the park, not found her, I don't know. But at this point, it wasn't looking good for her survival anyway. Trisha was in a coma, and the doctors were not sure if she would survive these awful injuries. Meanwhile, the police were out looking for her assailant. News of her attack exploded all over New York City, and 1989 was a time when crime rates were still high and people were afraid in New York. The pressure was on to solve this case, and fast. Now, the police believe they had a good lead as they'd received a number of calls about a group of about 30 to 40 young boys and young men who were reportedly physically assaulting people in the park on the night of Trisha's attack. So there were reports from victims who'd been robbed and others who reported being pulled off of bicycles, punched in the face, kicked, having, again, robbed items taken from them. The police had responded to the other physical attacks before they learned about Trisha's brutal assault. So they'd already made contact with a number of these boys and already had a number of them in for questioning at the precinct. Of these boys, Kevin Richardson and Raymond Santana, both age 14 at the time, were the first to be taken in for questioning in connection with Trisha's. It was actually in connection with the other assaults of the evening. However, they were in custody and they were being questioned.
It's incredible to me how, we've been working in this area since before I had children, right? So I've known about this case. And when I think of a 14-year-old, it just hits different now that I have a child who's almost 14.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. That's a baby. 14 is so young. And
Very
their
young.
parents weren't with them at the station?
I'll discuss in a moment, yeah, because there's a couple people and a couple scenarios here. So they were in the park on April 19th, but they said that they had not partaken in the robbery or the assaults. However, they gave up names of other boys who did. So the next day, 15-year-olds Antron McCrae and Yusef Salam and 16-year-old Corey Wise were taken in for questioning. So Corey Wise wasn't even a suspect. He was actually going to the station, to the police precinct, to support his friend Yusef, whose name had come up in the investigation. I think he just offered to go help him. Now, all 5 of these boys were juveniles, and you had asked about this. Some had parents present in the interviews, but not all. In New York at the time, police were required to make efforts to inform parents that their juvenile children were being questioned, but they did not have to be in the room, and juveniles could waive Miranda rights.
Efforts is very subjective. Like, what does an effort mean?
I was going to point that out, right? What does it actually mean to make an effort? So efforts to make the parents aware. Some of the parents were there. Some of the parents weren't in the room. Some were. Some let their child speak. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. But again, juveniles could waive Miranda rights at the time. And 4 of the 5 boys waived Miranda rights, as I think you probably remember. And I am still not sure how it became these 5, what they exactly said. Was it an account from someone else? Was it their location? What about these 5 exactly? I only know that Corey Wise only got involved really because of an association. But these boys were interrogated by the police, who had now become convinced, led by the chief of the Sex Crimes Prosecution Unit of Manhattan's District Attorney's Office, Linda Fairstein, that it could not be a coincidence that Tricia had been attacked on the same night that all the other assaults had taken place. Linda Fairstein became very convinced, like, obviously, there's some brutal attacks going, and I don't want to minimize at all the attacks that happened on these other people because some of them were severe. And she thought, well, if they're being attacked, clearly that has to be related to Patricia Meili's attack.
And this is a perfect example of tunnel vision and confirmation bias. This is where, if you point to where the issue started, yes, we could say it started in that interrogation room because the interrogation obviously went very wrong. But once she decided that she knew who did it, that took the case in a total different direction, and they stopped even considering the possibility of another theory.
Correct. And several hours after of interrogation, the boys began to confess to the attack on Tricia, each making statements about either restraining her or touching her inappropriately. None of them, I think it's important, none of them admitted to the full sexual assault, if that makes sense, but to different parts of it.
Not to mention the inaccuracies. The things that they were saying did not line up with the evidence.
No. Or with
That's
each
a red
other.
flag. Or with each other. But not lining up with each other, that's problematic. But the fact that it didn't line up with the evidence, both of those are problematic. But
okay, at this point, it was early on, though.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter to the police.
Yeah.
They had their 5 assailants. They had videotaped confessions from 3 of them. And these 5 were quickly arrested for the attack on Patricia Meili.
I suggest everyone check out those interrogations because they were video recorded and you can see them.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so 5 arrests are made, but what about Tricia? She was in a coma, and what would the charges be? Would this be murder? Would Tricia survive? Well, Tricia was a fighter, and 12 days after she went into that coma and her attack, she woke up, shocked to find herself in a New York hospital room packed with flowers. One bouquet she had received was from none other than Frank Sinatra.
Oh.
Unbelievably. But she had no idea why she was there. And unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, Tricia had no recollection of her attack 12 days earlier. Though she was awake now and made aware of this awful attack on her, she had a very long road to recovery in every way. The traumatic brain injury she sustained caused serious physical and cognitive functioning impairments. Tricia could not walk. When she realized she couldn't walk, this reality kind of set in the true extent of how badly she was hurt. She was asked to draw a picture of a clock by a therapist, but she couldn't quite process which hand did what. And Tricia said this was also a very big moment in that she became aware of the extent of her cognitive troubles. But she was determined to walk again. And Amy, that's exactly what she did, slowly recuperating for 7 weeks in a Connecticut ICU, becoming physically stronger and improving her cognitive abilities too.
Why was she in an ICU? Is that right?
Yes.
You mean a rehab center? No? Okay. ICU is intensive care unit in a hospital usually.
Yes, but she required intensive care for 7 weeks. This was not a traditional rehab. So I think maybe it was the ICU unit of either a Connecticut hospital or Connecticut rehab, but she was in intensive care.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Tricia was going to need all of the strength that she could muster because in 1990, the following year after her attack, she was going to testify in the trial against her 5 alleged assailants. The 5 boys who went to trial were tried in 2 separate trials, a strategic move by the prosecution, since the confessions were riddled with problems and parts had to be redacted. Some were stronger than others. They couldn't quite make all of the confessions fit together. And the problem was if they had tried them all together, not all the information fit. They had to remove a lot of information as well. And it would have weakened their case. Mm-hmm. So if the confessions were broken out into 2 separate trials, they would be much, much easier for the jury to digest. There's also a rule that about being able to confront your accuser. And because some of the boys weren't going to testify, some of what their accusers said could not be used. So this got very complicated. Essentially, they decided strategic to break the trials apart. Mm-hmm. However, the defense also favored separate trials because they didn't want the jury to see 5 boys and think the term that was used, and that was wolf pack or pack. They wanted them to see the boys as individuals, as kids, and reducing the numbers worked in their favor, they thought as well.
Do you remember the language was so important that was used in the media, like wilding out, wolf pack? Like there was so much, like, I don't know. Did they talk about that in the documentary? I forget.
Absolutely. And let's talk about wolfpack and wilding. These were the terms that were used to describe the teens, which also reinforced a presumption of guilt. These terms are very controversial, especially wilding, and their origins are still unclear. So whether it was the kids, the police, or the media who used these terms first, they did come from this case, and they were used as a way to describe young urban males who went on crime sprees for fun. The term wilding is widely accepted as a racial depiction of like primitive, aggressive minority males. So it has a very negative connotation. Breaking up the trials also did not prevent them from becoming a media storm. When the first one began, there wasn't an empty seat in the courtroom or a media outlet unaccounted for. Spectators ranged from journalists to family members to other members of the public who had been following the case since the attack. Given the age of the boys and the brutality of the crime, the atmosphere was tense and emotionally charged. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered every day. Now, the crowds were split. Some of them were demanding justice for Tricia, while others protested the treatment of the accused teens. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, even our current president, Donald Trump, who was an established real estate tycoon at the time and spent a reported $85,000 on a New York Times advertisement and an ad in 3 other newspapers titled, "Bring Back the Death Penalty, Bring Back Our Police." Do you remember this?
Of course. That was a huge point. Not a huge point, but that was a huge issue that was brought up in the case or highlighted. That became, because after what ends up happening, that was brought back up.
So this case polarized New York City, and the courthouse steps became a stage for public outrage, racial tension, and calls for reform. Demonstrators held signs, chanted slogans, and sometimes clashed with one another, which really reflected the broader societal divisions that this case had exposed in New York at the time. And as citizens chanted in the streets below, the boys found themselves in deep trouble in the courtroom above. Their attorneys had argued to keep those confessions out of evidence, since all 5 boys had claimed that the confessions were false, just weeks after their interrogations. They had said that they only confessed because they'd been threatened, trapped, tired, and physically assaulted. In particular, Corey Wise reported being beaten by officers until he would confess, while Yusuf Salam said that he could hear Corey being beaten and police told him that he was next.
Corey also had some developmental delays, if I remember correct.
I think he did. Okay. I don't remember specifically, but yes, I think you are correct. I know that he wasn't fully literate as well. I remember that reading was a problem. This argument of coercion did not prevail, though, and the confessions were admitted. Patricia Meili's testimony was also significant. And though Tricia was nervous about testifying, she felt like the jury should see and hear the extent of her injuries and the impact this assault had on her life. She detailed what I described earlier, the injuries, but she also explained to the jury how the after effects caused her to struggle with balancing and coordination, walking down steps. She had cognitive issues with her memory, as well as permanent double vision, and she completely lost her sense of smell. It was powerful testimony, and I think it was also powerful just to see her. From what I understand, she had trouble walking to the stand as well. But regardless of the extent of her injuries, Tricia still could not recall who had assaulted her. At the end of the trial, there was no physical evidence or any evidence at all, really, other than the confessions that connected the 5 boys to the assault. Nonetheless, all 5 were convicted and sentenced to prison terms of 5 to 15 years for those who were under 16, which was 4 of them. But in Corey Wise's case, he was sentenced to 12 to 15 years since he was considered an adult in New York. Now, the criminal case was over, but the story was not. Tricia continued on her long road to recovery, but she didn't let it hold her back. Here are the things that I love discovering in researching this case that the media didn't get. Only a few months after her attack, she joined a runners club for people with disabilities. Oh. And amazingly, 6 years later in 1995, Patricia Meili ran the New York City Marathon.
Incredible.
Not only completing it, but get this, doing it in 4.5 hours. Oh. I thought that was unbelievable.
Incredible.
She said that this was such a momentous occasion for her, feeling like she also, the run, the fact that she could run again like that, but also feeling like she had reclaimed her park. Mm-hmm. That same year, she also met a man on a blind date who she would marry a year later in 1996. Tricia returned to an administrative position at Salomon Brothers until 1998, when she left the company to pivot, and she began volunteering with groups that were connected to her recovery. And this included Mount Sinai's Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, the Gaylord Hospital in Connecticut, where she spent a majority of her time recuperating, and the Achilles Track Club, who had helped her prepare for her marathon. Her life was moving forward, even as she acknowledged that she would never be the same after the attack. And she said this realization and this admission was instrumental in her healing, saying it out loud, "Yes, this has changed me." But a few years later, there would be a big development in her criminal case that turned everything Tricia knew upside down. It was a development nobody could have predicted. In 2002, 4 of the 5 boys, now men, had been released from prison. The only one left incarcerated was Corey Wise. He was serving the tail end of his prison sentence at the Auburn Correctional Facility in New York when he met a man named Matthias Reyes, who was serving a sentence of 33 years to life for rape and murder. The two had actually met years before when they were pre-trial at New York's Rikers Island, notoriously one of the worst jails in the nation. Mm-hmm. And apparently, at that first meeting, they had gotten in somewhat of a scuffle. Probably young, packed in Rikers, a lot of things going on there. But the second time they met as adults who had both been serving lengthy prison sentences. And something about meeting Corey again made an impact on Reyes because, much to everyone's surprise, after this meeting, Reyes contacted the authorities with a bombshell revelation. He claimed that he was the true perpetrator of the brutal assault on Patricia Meili and that he'd acted alone.
Wow. I don't know how I don't know this, but was he offered anything in exchange for this information, or this was just out of the goodness of his heart?
It was of his own volition, offered nothing. And there were so many questions. Why would he come forward, like you just said? Was this possible? Had he known the men, like, convicted? Was he maybe friends with them? Was he with them in the park? And, you know, they had reason to doubt what he said because people falsely confess to crimes, as we know, even from prison for various reasons. So they had to verify this information. And luckily, they had DNA from Trisha and from the crime. And so they tested the DNA against Reyes. And you won't believe it, but it was a match. Mateus Reyes was Trisha's attacker. I want to just point this out, Amy. You asked this, and before you say anything, when asked why he finally admitted to it, he said that he was really hard to explain and he didn't know why, but he just knew it was the right thing to do at the time.
Okay. Well, sometimes when people are serving lengthy sentences, they change, they find religion. He might have had a come-to moment. If I remember correctly, or maybe not in this case, I know certainly in other cases, it's very easy for the prosecutor to say, okay, so that means there were 6 offenders. His DNA there does not necessarily exclude the other boys, correct? So they had more work to do still.
Well, so it did not exclude them. And here's what Trisha said. She wasn't really shocked to learn that there was another perpetrator against her because she knew that the DNA was unidentified in her case. Like, they had the DNA. It wasn't a match to any of the 5 boys. So the explanation was that, yes, these 5 were involved. And yes, there's someone else that we couldn't apprehend.
Okay.
You know, there were 30 or 40 people in the park that night. We don't know who the 6th perpetrator was. However, she was very surprised. And I think everyone was very surprised that he claimed sole responsibility for the attack.
Okay.
Trisha believed, and her doctors believed, that the evidence indicated multiple assailants. However, I will say Reyes gave a lot of information, and as it turns out, it was more credible because he was a serial rapist. Now, he was in prison for a murder and a rape, but he had several sexual assaults. In fact, they were searching for an Upper East Side rapist, and this turned out to be him. And when he described how he was in the park, where he was lying in wait, when he described his history, the people that he had assaulted, all of these facts were verifiable, and it became pretty clear to most people involved in the investigation, or they thought it was likely, that this was exactly what he said, that he was the sole perpetrator in this case. And I mean, this admission and the investigation had huge implications for the 5 men who'd been convicted in his stead.
How much longer was Corey? Like, how much longer did Corey have on his sentence?
He didn't have much, but he was released early from his prison sentence. And as you know, all 5 of the men filed a civil suit against New York City and received a settlement totaling $41 million. They have since moved on with their lives, serving as advocates for justice reform. But as Corey Wise had said, quote, "You can forgive, but you won't forget. You won't get back what you lost. No money could bring that time back. No money could bring the life that was missing or the time that was taken away." There's a lot more to their story, of course, but this is an episode about Trisha and not about the 5 men. Although I feel like you want to add something, so go right ahead.
I want to add one thing, only because it's relevant. Raymond Santana was a guest speaker in one of my FDU classes. Did you know that when I first started?
No? Are you kidding?
Yes. Yeah, so I've seen them all speak before at the Innocence Network conferences that I go to. And Raymond Santana was at FDU. And this was years ago. It's when I first started. I don't know how I was able to get him to come. But it was incredible. Yeah.
I had no idea he was at FDU. Why did you had to have told me, but
I know, but
was that like my
so
sick day or something? Oh my goodness.
No, it probably maybe you didn't realize who it was. Like, I was just like, I have an exoneree coming. Like, maybe we didn't put it together that it was someone
perhaps
high profile. I don't know.
And was he, I'm just curious, was he a great speaker? I mean, did he have an impact?
He's incredible. Okay. They're all incredible. I think, isn't Youssef, I know this isn't about them, but Youssef now works in city council. Like, they all have these incredible, they're all doing incredible work. But wow. So how did Trisha feel about the fact that the wrong men were serving time for the heinous crimes?
Well, this is interesting. I don't think to this day Trisha is certain that they were not involved. And I'll tell you what she said. And yeah, let's bring it back to her, okay? Because 1 year after these exonerations, in 2003, Trisha published a book, a memoir titled I Am the Central Park Jogger, A Story of Hope and Possibility. This was the first time she revealed her identity to the public, as her name had been kept anonymous during the trial. But I think what Trisha said was that wasn't necessarily her choice. I'm not sure that she wanted to remain anonymous per se. She definitely felt at this point that it was time to put her face out there. And she said it was really important to show others, especially that life did not end for her after her brain injury. So there was a lot of attention, of course, on the exonerations and while there should have been, and on the true perpetrator. But I think Trisha also wanted to make sure that her story didn't get lost, because her story was really an inspiration to others who had suffered these traumatic injuries and sexual assault and were looking for hope and resilience. So though Trisha she still cannot recall what happened to her in the park, she is not sure that the system has gotten it right. So according to her statements, evidence she has been presented with over the years does point to more than one assailant. And what she has said is that she just wishes they didn't close the case after Reyes. As you had asked me, what did Reyes get? Reyes didn't get anything, but he didn't get tried for the case because the statute of limitations had run out.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. So there was no punishment. There was the admission.
I wonder if that was strategic, if he waited until he knew that the statute of limitations ran out.
It's very possible. However, I think, I'm not sure the exact date, but I think it did come quickly after he met Corey Wise again as an adult. So maybe also realizing, hey, I can't be tried for this. He came to, but surely even not being tried, his sentence was open, 33 years to life. Surely admitting to it wasn't going to look good for the parole board. So this was still, a pretty risky move. For now, the DNA and the admission can only be traced to the one person, which is Reyes. As for her thoughts, though, on the Central Park Five, as the now grown boys are referred to, Trisha has said that, she's not sure, but if they are innocent and they went to prison, it only adds to the tragedy of that night. And I think that's a fair assessment on her part. Trisha has since gone on to work with victims of sexual assault and those with brain injuries as well. In addition to her book, she's become a motivational speaker, giving talks about trauma, resilience, and recovery with an emphasis on perseverance. She's still a runner as well, and I think that the strength she developed from running likely aided very much in her physical recovery. Patricia Meili survived what no person should ever have to endure, but her survival and recovery stand as a testament to the power of resilience, healing, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Her journey continues to resonate in discussions about justice, trauma, and recovery, and I think it always will. Okay. Yeah.
I'm so glad that we need to do this more. I'm going to start thinking of other high-profile cases that lose the victim in the story.
Yeah.
You've been doing a couple of those. So it's inspiring. Thank you.
You know what? She inspired me. Reading about this inspired me. And it really was watching the series again in class and going, this is so good, but realizing, I don't know enough about her. Like, I want to know more about her and what happened to her because she was, the first victim in this case. So, all right. Well, let's talk about, whether the system got it right. There's a couple of ways to discuss this. There are a couple of ways in which the system failed on this case. So I think there's the obvious wrongful convictions. And if we look to explain that theoretically, Amy, how would we explain that, these wrongful convictions? Are these boys assumed guilty? It's a couple ways, right?
Yeah, you're saying the reason why they were on the radar to begin with?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly it's a race and class issue. Yeah. They were on the radar of police immediately. And like I mentioned before, I feel like tunnel vision and confirmation bias is the best way to understand how things went off the rails here.
I mean, I just think of also this is obvious labeling theory, right? Labeling young minority males as seemingly, aggressive, violent, and presumably guilty, which again does not I don't, you know what? I was curious, though. I want to say one thing I don't know. I don't know if Raymond Santana talked about it, but I don't know if any of those 5 were involved with any of the other attacks or other crimes that evening. That is something that I could not find, which does not mean that they had anything to do with Trisha's. But I was just wondering if they had any role. I'm not sure. There were many boys that were in the park were spectators or just in the park, while others actively took place.
I do know that some of them, I don't know if it was Raymond or someone else, but a few of them have admitted to kind of what they call running the streets. Like they were involved in certain behavior. And we could explain that through, obviously, social disorganization and social structure theories. But I don't think any of them, not all of them. Some of them were, some of them have no criminal history at all. And I think some did. But
and
either
again,
way,
it doesn't mean they're connected, but it's just something
it doesn't. But it also helps us understand because the usual suspect, right? Those are the people that are on the radar of police.
Yeah. I mean, their convictions weren't just a miscarriage of justice either. They were really kind of a mirror to New York City racial divide and fear-driven politics at the time.
And if I'm not mistaken, Reyes committed other crimes while the wrong people were serving time for his crimes.
That is absolutely correct. He was a serial and probably lifelong offender. And when he, just, the assault that he perpetrated on Trisha, he was 17 years old at the time. So he was young.
Yeah. And that's the thing with wrongful convictions. A lot of times the focus is on the miscarriage of justice, and people forget that it's a public safety issue as well. Because if the wrong people are in prison, then the right person is often in the community posing a threat.
That's correct. And he was. And he went on to perpetrate other crimes for which he was eventually caught. But if he was apprehended initially or, if there was attention not totally laser focused on the boys. I mean, this case captured the nation. It also kind of showed how race, media, and public pressure, like the collision it happened in a city that was already kind of on edge. And the city was on edge. Crime rates were still high then. Beyond the justice system, though, I think there was a second failure in the discourse around Patricia Meili. I didn't discuss this previously, but I will say that while Trisha felt an outpouring of support from people who knew her and many who did not, one question kept coming up that she kept getting asked. Do you have any idea what people would keep asking her?
I'm going to assume it has to do with victim blaming. So maybe they were wondering what she was wearing when she was jogging, why she was jogging by herself at night.
That's it. That's the question, and not what she was wearing, but yes, why was she running alone in the park at night? And Trisha would reply, because I loved running. New York was my home.
And I should be allowed to run.
Yeah. And she didn't feel unsafe, she said. She felt at home and at peace. But what's great here is beyond that, she pushed back on the implication that it was her actions that led to the attack or that she somehow bore responsibility for a serial predator assaulting her. So I was so glad to read this because I think her stance inspired a much larger conversation about women's safety, autonomy, and the tendency to blame victims instead of focusing on the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Some might say Trisha's survival is a miracle, but I think it was her inherent strength in every way that led to her not just surviving, but thriving. And beyond her personal recovery, she's become kind of a touchstone in broader conversations about criminal justice reform, victim advocacy, and societal attitudes about how we assign blame and seek accountability. Her story continues to challenge us to center the humanity of survivors and to confront the systems that failed. Not just her, but the wrongly accused and the communities impacted by both violence and injustice. That is our episode for today. And yeah, it was both a heavy one, but a totally inspiring one. And I'm really glad that I got to learn so much more about Patricia Meili. She is such an inspiration, really is.
Thank you again for focusing on a victim who often gets lost in the story. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. All right, everyone. We'll catch you next time on Women&Crime.
Women&Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abigail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso, and music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include ABC News, BBC, Good Housekeeping, Oxygen.com, the American Psychological Association, www.nas.org, DePaul University Newsroom, and allamericans.speakers.com.